She was about to leave the ball, until the Duke's mother took her hand and said, "Stay beside my son." Every corner was filled with nobles in shimmering gowns and embroidered coats, all speaking in soft, calculated tones. The air smelled of roses, incense, and the faint chill of autumn that had crept through the tall windows. For some, it was a night of celebration. For others, a stage for secrets, for ambitions hidden behind delicate fans and polite smiles. Among the crowd moved a young noblewoman named Ilara. Her dress was a soft shade of midnight blue, simple yet elegant, flowing around her as she navigated the throng of courtiers. She had come out of duty rather than desire, drawn to the ball by her mother's insistence and her family's debts that needed careful attention. Her eyes, dark and observant, held a quiet intelligence that few noticed amidst the spectacle. Ilara moved with grace, nodding politely to acquaintances, offering smiles that didn't quite reach her heart. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her, the endless chatter about alliances, titles, and whispers of the Duke, the most enigmatic man in the court. Rumors clung to him like shadows, speaking of his beauty, his power, and some dark secret that made even the boldest noble hesitate in his presence. She had been contemplating leaving, slipping away to the quiet corridors of the palace, where the music would fade and the wind would carry only her own thoughts. The ball felt like a gilded cage, and her feet itched to move beyond its walls. Her hand reached for the edge of her cloak, the fabric brushing against her fingers, when a firm yet gentle touch stopped her. "Ilara," a voice said, calm and commanding, yet layered with a softness she did not expect. She turned to see the Duke's mother, a regal woman draped in deep green and gold. Her eyes, sharp and knowing, seemed to see through the crowded room and directly into Ilara's thoughts. "Stay beside my son," the woman said, taking Ilara's hand in hers. There was no demand in her tone, only certainty, as if the words carried weight that went beyond the simple act of speaking. "You are meant to be near him tonight." Ilara's heart skipped. She hesitated, unsure what to say. The Duke's mother gave her a small, knowing smile and released her hand. "You will understand soon enough." Then, with a subtle nod, she disappeared into the crowd, leaving Ilara with the faint scent of jasmine and something unnameable, an echo of fate, perhaps, or a warning she did not yet understand. Her gaze drifted across the ballroom. And there, standing at the edge of the shadowed balcony, was the Duke himself. He was taller than most, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck and eyes that held the kind of intensity that made people feel both drawn to him and afraid. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of curiosity, boredom, and something darker that hinted at secrets buried deep. He noticed her immediately, his gaze sliding over her as if he could measure every thought she tried to hide. For a moment their eyes met across the glittering room, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara felt a pull she could not explain, a sudden and inexplicable desire to stay, though she had been certain she wanted to leave. Something in his eyes, a mixture of loneliness and hidden pain, kept her rooted to the spot. The murmurs of the court faded into a dull hum, as though the rest of the world had disappeared. She walked toward him cautiously, and as she neared she felt a strange shiver run down her spine. The Duke stepped forward to meet her, and the space between them seemed electric with unspoken words. He did not bow, nor did he smile. Instead, he studied her as one studies a rare and precious artifact, with attention that made her pulse quicken. "You've come," he said quietly, his voice smooth, almost melodic, carrying a hint of challenge. I was thinking of leaving," Ilara admitted, her voice low but steady. "The night is heavy." He nodded slightly, as if he understood more than she could imagine. "Perhaps it is," he said. Then, almost to himself, he added, "But some things are meant to be endured or discovered." Ilara looked at him, trying to decipher the meaning behind his words. There was pain there, yes, but also a kind of strength that seemed unyielding. And yet beneath it all she sensed a quiet yearning, something he kept hidden even from himself. The ballroom seemed to fade around them as they spoke. Music, laughter, and the rustle of silk were still there, but distant, unimportant. The Duke's mother had been right. Fate, or something like it, had guided her to this moment. "You are brave," he said suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. "Most would have fled when faced with the weight of my family, my past." "I am not most," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness in her tone. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. For a moment, the hardness of his features softened. "Perhaps that is why you are here," he murmured. As the evening continued, they moved through the palace corridors together, finding small pockets of silence amid the noise of the celebration. Each moment was charged, a tension neither could fully name. Alara felt drawn to him, not by his title or the rumors of power, but by the quiet loneliness she saw in him, a loneliness that mirrored her own in ways she had never admitted. The Duke led her to a balcony that overlooked the palace gardens, bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and roses. It was a quiet place away from the crowd, where secrets seemed safer to speak. "You must know," he said, his voice low and hesitant, "there are things about me you would not understand at first." Alara tilted her head, meeting his gaze without fear. "Then tell me," she said simply. "I want to understand." He looked away, his expression momentarily distant. "Some shadows cannot be explained, only lived with," he said. Alara felt a pang of curiosity mixed with apprehension. There was so much he did not reveal, yet she did not want to turn away. The pull between them was undeniable, a force that seemed to grow stronger with each passing moment. "Stay," he said suddenly, turning back to her. "Stay here with me if you can." Her hand brushed his, a fleeting touch that sent warmth through her chest. I will stay," she whispered. It was not just an agreement, it was a choice, a surrender to something greater than herself, a connection she could neither ignore nor resist. For a heartbeat, they simply stood there, side by side, watching the moonlight ripple across the gardens. Then from somewhere deep within the palace, a soft, chilling sound reached them, a faint echo like chains brushing against stone. The Duke stiffened, his hand tightening slightly on the balcony railing. Alara noticed the change immediately, her heart skipping. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He did not answer. Instead, his eyes darkened, and the intensity she had seen before deepened into something more, something almost dangerous. "Nothing, yet," he said finally, his voice low. "But it will come. There are forces at work you cannot see, not yet." Alara swallowed hard, but she did not move away. She had promised herself she would stay. And now, standing beside him, she felt the weight of destiny pressing down, a force as real as the wind that played with their hair. "Then we will face it," she said, her voice firmer now. Together. The Duke turned to her, his expression unreadable, yet in his eyes a flicker of hope appeared, quick, fragile, but unmistakable. "Perhaps," he said almost to himself, "that is exactly what I need." The moonlight cast long shadows across the balcony, stretching toward the palace like fingers of fate. The night seemed endless, and yet, in that brief moment, everything had shifted. Alara was no longer merely a guest at a ball. She was a part of a story far greater than she could have imagined. A story of shadows, secrets, and the fragile, beautiful spark of connection that dared to bloom in darkness. And somewhere in the depths of the palace, the Duke's mother watched silently, a faint smile on her lips. She had known from the moment she saw Alara that this night would change everything. And change, it seemed, had already begun. The next day, the palace seemed different. The sun cast a golden glow over the tall marble towers, and the gardens shimmered with dew. Yet, for Alara, the beauty of the morning did little to calm the echo of the previous night. She could still feel the weight of the Duke's gaze upon her, the intensity that had drawn her like a moth to a flame. The sound of the soft, distant music, the gentle murmur of servants, and the rustle of silk all reminded her of the tension that lingered behind his calm exterior. Ilara walked down the main hall, her steps careful but determined. She had intended to keep her promise to the Duke and stay close, yet curiosity and fear mingled within her. There were so many things she did not understand about him: the shadows in his eyes, the sudden coldness in his smile, the hints of something dangerous yet fragile. She did not know whether to be drawn closer or to retreat, but as she moved, she felt that invisible thread tugging at her heart, urging her forward. The Duke awaited her in the smaller corridors behind the palace, where the walls were lined with tapestries depicting battles and kings long past. The air was cooler here, the sounds of the main hall distant and muted. He stood with his back to a window, arms crossed, staring out at the courtyard. "Ilara," he said without turning, his voice low, carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts. "You did not leave this morning, though you could have." "Why?" she hesitated. "Because last night felt important," she admitted, "and I think I need to understand you, even if it is difficult." He finally turned, and for a moment his expression softened. "Most would not come back after seeing what I truly am," he said, a hint of sorrow in his voice. "They see me as a man of power, but power is only a mask. Behind it, there is only solitude and shadows that do not let go." Ilara felt a shiver run through her. "I do not care about the mask," she said firmly. "I want to see the man beneath it." He studied her as if weighing her words against some invisible measure. Finally, he nodded slightly, a rare gesture of approval. "Very well," he said. "But know this. What you will see is not easy to face. Not everyone survives knowing the truth about me." Her curiosity only deepened. "I can face it," she said, her voice steady despite the fluttering in her chest. "I want to face it." The Duke gestured for her to follow, leading her through narrow, quiet corridors that most nobles never saw. The walls seemed older here, and the air carried a faint scent of parchment and candle smoke. They arrived at a small room overlooking the palace gardens. Inside, the light was dim, filtered through heavy curtains, and the furniture was simple, functional, and untouched by the extravagance of the main halls. "This room," he began, "is where I come when I need solitude. It is where I can think without the masks of the court, without the obligations of a title." Ilara nodded, sensing the vulnerability in his words. "And what do you think about?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "The past. The mistakes I cannot undo, the people I have lost, and the curse that has lingered over my family for generations." Her eyes widened. "A curse?" He nodded, the shadow of a frown crossing his face. "Yes, not the kind that turns men into beasts or causes immediate harm. It is subtler. It feeds on pain, on isolation. It makes people fear closeness, trust, love. It shapes the choices I make, even when I try to resist it." Alara's heart thudded. She had expected mystery, perhaps, but not something so deeply personal, so tragic. Yet rather than fear, she felt a pull toward him, a desire to help, to be near him despite the danger. "Then I will face it with you," she said, her voice soft but determined. "I will not run." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes searching hers. For the first time, she saw something break through the carefully built walls around him, a spark of hope, fragile and flickering. "I do not know if that is wise," he said finally, "but I am grateful." They spent the next hours walking through the gardens, where sunlight played across the fountains, and the autumn leaves rustled like whispered secrets. He spoke in fragments, revealing parts of himself without fully explaining the curse, hinting at his fears and the burden of his lineage. She listened, offering comfort in small ways, a touch of the hand, a gentle question, a quiet smile. As they walked, Ilara noticed the way the courtiers observed them from a distance, whispers trailing after them like invisible threads. But she did not care. She was drawn to the Duke, not by curiosity alone, but by the unmistakable connection that seemed to grow with each passing moment. "You are brave," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. Most would not venture near me, not knowing the risks, and yet here you are." Alara smiled faintly. "Perhaps I see more than risk," she said. "Perhaps I see someone in need of a friend, and maybe more than that." His lips curved slightly, a rare gesture that held both amusement and vulnerability. "You are unlike anyone I have met," he admitted. As the afternoon waned, they returned to the palace, moving through corridors that grew quieter as the day passed. In a small, secluded gallery, they paused before a large painting of a stormy sea. Waves crashed with wild intensity, and the dark sky seemed to mirror the Duke's own turmoil. "This," he said, "reminds me of the life I lead, always teetering on the edge of chaos, never certain if I will survive the next storm. And yet, there are moments of calm, of beauty. Moments that make the struggle worthwhile." Alara studied the painting and then looked at him. "And you are not alone," she said softly. "Even in the storm, there can be someone to stand beside you." He regarded her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Perhaps," he said, voice low and husky, "but few are willing to stay when the darkness rises. Most flee, thinking it is safer to avoid me." "I do not fear you," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "Not entirely. I do not know everything, but I do know this. I want to stay." For a long moment they simply stood there, the silence between them speaking louder than any words. She felt the tension in the air, the delicate balance of power and trust, fear and longing. The Duke's expression was unreadable, yet in his eyes she saw the flicker of something rare, hope, or perhaps the beginning of trust. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed through the gallery, a distant footstep, though no one should have been there. The Duke stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. "Alara," he whispered, "the palace, it is never as quiet as it seems. There are things that move unseen, people or perhaps shadows. You must be careful." Alara's pulse quickened, but she did not pull away. Instead, she tightened her grip on his hand, silently offering courage in return. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice firm. He looked at her, a mixture of awe and uncertainty in his gaze. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "that is why you are here. To face the darkness, not flee from it." The day turned to evening, and the golden light faded into the soft silver of twilight. Candles flickered along the halls, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The Duke led Alara to a secluded terrace overlooking the palace grounds, where the air was filled with the scent of roses and the quiet rustle of leaves. For a moment, they simply stood there, side by side, watching the night settle over the palace. The tension between them remained, but now it was mingled with a fragile sense of trust and the beginnings of something more, a connection neither fully understood, yet both could not ignore. "You must promise me," he said suddenly, his voice low, "that you will be cautious. There are forces at work here that you cannot see. Not yet." Alara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I promise," she said, "but I will not leave you no matter what comes." He regarded her silently, and for a long moment the only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the distant murmur of the palace. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, he reached out and gently took her hand. Alara felt a shiver run through her. It was not fear. It was the weight of trust, of connection, of unspoken promise. For the first time, she sensed that she had not only chosen to stay beside him, but that the Duke himself had begun to need her presence, as fragile and fleeting as it might be. As the night deepened, a faint shadow moved across the garden below, a subtle shifting darkness that seemed to pulse with silent intent. The Duke noticed it this time, his eyes narrowing. "Not yet," he whispered almost to himself. "But soon it will come." Alara did not pull away. She felt the pull of destiny, the silent thread that had guided her here. Whatever was coming, she would face it, together. The moon rose high, casting silver light over the palace grounds. The night was full of quiet tension, of secrets and hidden truths, of longing that neither could name. And somewhere deep within the walls of the palace, the shadow waited, patient, watching and ready. Alara took a deep breath, holding the Duke's hand tightly. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." He gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod, the corner of his lips twitching in something like a smile. "Together," he agreed. And in that moment, under the silver light of the moon, the palace seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the storm that would come. The palace had grown quiet as the days passed, but Alara could feel the weight of the Duke's world pressing closer. The more time she spent near him, the more she understood that the rumors and whispers were only a shadow of the truth. There was a darkness to him, a history and burden that clung to his every step, like a fog that refused to lift. Yet she could not turn away, for she had glimpsed a fragility beneath his strength, a part of him that longed for understanding, for connection, for someone brave enough to stand beside him. It was late afternoon when the Duke led her to a wing of the palace few ever saw. The corridor was lined with ancient tapestries, their colors faded but still rich with the tales of battles long past. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of stone and candle wax. Shadows stretched along the walls, creating shapes that seemed to move just beyond the corner of her eyes. "This wing," he said quietly, "was abandoned years ago, most avoid it. Few want to know what lies behind these doors." Alara glanced around, curiosity rising despite a flutter of unease. "And what lies behind them?" He stopped at a door carved with intricate symbols she did not recognize. His hand lingered on the handle. "Truth," he said, his voice heavy with meaning. "And danger. You must promise me that if you enter, you will trust me completely. There is no turning back once you see it." Alara met his gaze, steady and determined. "I trust you," she said simply. "Even if I do not understand everything, I trust you." He nodded, a faint relief in his eyes. "Very well," he said, pushing the door open. The room beyond was vast and dimly lit. Candlelight flickered against the high ceilings, casting long, dancing shadows. Old books and artifacts filled the space, relics of a family history steeped in mystery and forgotten power. "This is where the curse began," the Duke said, stepping inside. "Where my ancestors made choices that have haunted this family for generations. It is not a simple curse, Alara. It is a shadow that feeds on pain, doubt, and fear. It does not strike like a storm. It lingers quietly until it consumes everything." Alara felt a chill, but she did not move away. "And you are trapped by it?" she asked softly. He nodded, his expression darkening. "Yes. I have lived with it my whole life, learning to hide the pain, to wear the mask of a duke, a leader, a man unafraid. But the truth is that it isolates me, even from those I care for. It has shaped every choice, every friendship, every connection. And most of all, it has made me afraid of letting anyone close." Her heart ached at his words. She had known he carried burdens, but hearing him speak of it aloud made the weight real, tangible. "Then let me be close," she said gently. "Let me help you. Even if I cannot undo the past, I can stand with you now." He looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing the sincerity in her words. Then slowly, a small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "You are unlike anyone I have ever met," he said softly. "Most would flee when they see the shadow that clings to me." Alara stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. "I am not most," she said, "and I will not flee." For a moment he did not respond, simply letting her hand rest in his. The warmth of her touch seemed to reach a part of him long forgotten, a part that remembered what it was to trust, to hope, to feel safe in another's presence. Then, as if reminded of the dangers that always lurked near, his expression hardened again. "You must understand," he said, voice low, "that this curse does not forgive. The closer you come, the more it will test you, test us both. It feeds on weakness, on doubt, on fear, and it will not hesitate to strike." Alara nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. "Then we face it together," she said firmly, "no matter what comes." The Duke studied her, a mixture of admiration and concern in his gaze. "You are brave," he admitted, "perhaps more than you realize, but courage alone is not always enough. Sometimes it is not the body that is tested, but the heart. Alara swallowed, feeling the truth of his words. She had known there would be danger, but she had not fully understood how deep it ran, how intimately it touched every part of him. Yet even so, she did not step back. She could not. Something within her had already tethered her heart to his, and she would not deny it. Over the next days, they spent more time together in the hidden wing. He showed her the family archives, the letters and journals that spoke of fear, of regret, and of the beginnings of the curse. Each story revealed the weight he had carried alone, and each revelation made her heart ache for him. She began to see not just the Duke, but the man beneath the title, the man who had loved, lost, and survived despite the darkness that clung to him. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of gold and crimson, they found themselves alone in the library, the air heavy with the scent of old parchment and candle wax. The light through the tall windows cast long shadows across the floor. "Do you ever wonder if it will end?" Alara asked quietly, turning to him. "If the curse will ever release you?" He looked at her, eyes dark with thought. "Every day," he admitted. "But it is not that simple. The curse is tied to my family, to choices made long before I was born. It is not merely a punishment, it is a part of who I am. And yet, part of me wishes it could be undone, so I could live without fear, without isolation, without the constant reminder of what I might lose." Alara stepped closer, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "Then let me help you," she said. "Even if it cannot be undone, you do not have to face it alone." He regarded her silently, then slowly, almost hesitantly, took her hand in his. The warmth of her touch seemed to melt some of the ice that had long encased his heart. "You are brave," he said again, his voice softer this time, "and perhaps too brave for your own good." Alara smiled faintly, a mixture of determination and affection in her eyes. "Perhaps, but some things are worth the risk." As night fell, they moved to the balcony overlooking the gardens, where the moon cast silver light across the fountains and trees. The shadows of the night seemed alive, stretching and shifting in ways that made the air feel charged with possibility. "It will not be easy," the Duke said, his voice low. "The shadow that haunts me, it will test you, test us both. It feeds on fear, on hesitation, on doubt. And it is clever, it will not always attack directly. It will whisper, it will tempt, it will try to turn trust into suspicion, courage into hesitation." Alara listened, her heart steady despite the chill that ran through her. "Then we must be stronger," she said. "We cannot let it separate us. Not now, not ever." He looked at her, a flicker of hope in his dark eyes. "Perhaps, with you beside me, I have a chance I have never had before." For a while they simply stood there, hand in hand, watching the night unfold. The palace below them was silent, the gardens empty except for the whisper of leaves and the occasional distant footstep. Yet even in the stillness, Alara could feel the presence of something unseen, something waiting, patient, and watchful. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind swept across the balcony, carrying a faint whisper that made her shiver. The Duke's grip on her hand tightened instinctively. "It begins," he whispered, eyes narrowing as he scanned the shadows below. "The shadow, it is testing us." Alara did not pull away. She met his gaze, determination shining in her eyes. "Then we face it," she said. "Together." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips despite the tension. "Together," he agreed. And in that moment, under the pale light of the moon, the palace seemed to hold its breath. The night was alive with secrets, shadows, and the quiet promise of connection that neither could deny. But the shadow was patient, and it waited. And as the wind whispered through the garden below, Alara felt a thrill of fear and anticipation. The curse had begun to stir, and the trials that awaited them would test not just courage, but the very hearts that had dared to come together. Whatever was coming, they would face it side by side. And in that fragile, daring trust, a spark of hope had already been lit, a hope that might be the key to breaking the darkness that bound the Duke's life. The palace was quiet that night, but the air was heavy with tension. A cold wind swept through the halls, rustling curtains and carrying with it a faint, whispering sound that made Alara's skin prickle. She stood on the balcony beside the Duke, her hand tightly clasped in his. The shadows in the garden below were shifting, alive with a darkness that seemed almost conscious, and she could feel the weight of the curse pressing closer. The Duke's eyes were dark, filled with both determination and fear. He had faced the shadows alone for so long, and now he was not alone. Alara's presence beside him made him stronger, yet it also made him vulnerable. He had feared that someone close to him could be harmed by the curse, but she had chosen to stay. "It is here," he whispered, his voice low and tense. "The shadow has come to test us. It will try to divide us, to make us doubt each other, to turn courage into fear." Alara's grip on his hand tightened. "Then we will not let it. Whatever it does, we face it together." For a moment the night seemed to pause, the air heavy with anticipation. Then a movement in the garden below caught their attention, a dark, shifting form, twisting and flickering as if alive. The shadow was not merely a shape. It was a presence, feeding on fear, on hesitation, on doubt. It seemed to study them, circling like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The Duke stepped forward, his posture rigid, a mixture of readiness and caution. "It will try to break us," he said. "Do not give it that power." Alara nodded, courage rising in her chest. "I will not," she said firmly. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the shadow began to move closer, its edges curling and flickering like smoke. It was silent, yet its presence pressed against them, heavy and cold. The Duke's expression hardened, his eyes flashing with a mixture of fear and resolve. "This is what I have faced my whole life," he said quietly. "Alone, and yet with you it is different. I am not alone anymore." Alara looked at him, her heart aching with emotion. "You never were meant to be alone," she said softly. "Not completely. I am here, and I will stay." The shadow shifted suddenly, its form twisting and elongating, reaching toward them as if sensing the bond between them. The Duke took a deep breath, focusing all his strength, all the control he had learned over years of fear. "Stand beside me," he commanded, his voice steady and strong. "Trust me, trust us." Alara met his gaze, her own determination mirrored in his eyes. "I trust you," she said, "with everything." For a moment the world seemed to narrow to the two of them, hand in hand, facing the darkness together. The shadow moved closer, the cold pressing against their skin like ice. But something had changed. The Duke's fear, once so heavy and consuming, now shared with another, began to falter. Alara's courage, her willingness to face it alongside him, was like a light piercing through the darkness. The shadow hesitated, its twisting form faltering as if confused by the bond it could not understand. The Duke stepped forward, pulling Alara gently behind him, and spoke again, his voice strong and unwavering. "Your power is only in fear," he said to the shadow. "You feed on doubt. You have no hold over us. We are stronger together." The shadow writhed, twisting and flickering, as if resisting the light between them. For a moment, it seemed as though it might strike with all the force it had ever held against the Duke. But Alara did not flinch. She held his hand, and in that moment the darkness could not find a weakness to exploit. "You are not alone anymore," she whispered, "and you never will be." The shadow let out a low, unearthly sigh, and for a heartbeat it seemed as if the night itself held its breath. Then slowly it began to shrink, its form collapsing in on itself, dissolving into the air like mist. The garden below, once dark and foreboding, became still, bathed in the soft silver light of the moon. The Duke exhaled, his shoulders loosening for the first time in years. He looked at Alara, eyes filled with gratitude, awe, and something more, something tender and fragile, like the first rays of sunlight after a storm. "We did it," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It is gone, or at least it is no longer a threat." Alara smiled, her own heart racing with relief and joy. "We did it together," she said. "You are not alone anymore, and you will never be as long as I am here." He stepped closer, his hands gently holding hers. "I have hidden so much of myself for so long," he admitted, "afraid of the darkness within me, afraid of hurting anyone who came close, but you have seen it all and yet you did not turn away. You stayed." "I stayed because I wanted to," Alara said softly. "Not out of duty. Not out of fear. I stayed because I care about you." For a moment the world seemed to pause, the night holding its breath around them. The palace walls, the gardens, the moonlight, all faded into the background. There was only them and the fragile, powerful bond that had grown between them through fear, trust, and courage. The Duke's lips curved into a faint, tentative smile, the first true smile she had ever seen. "Perhaps," he said, "that is what I needed most. Not to fight the shadows alone, but to find someone willing to stand beside me, even in the darkest moments." Alara's heart fluttered, her chest tightening with emotion. "You are not alone," she repeated, "and you will never be. Whatever comes, we face it together." The night began to change, the heavy tension giving way to a quiet peace. The garden below shimmered in the moonlight, the shadows gone, replaced by the soft silver glow that bathed the fountains and trees. The palace, once filled with whispers of fear and secrets, seemed to breathe with a gentle calm. The Duke pulled her gently closer, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "I do not know what the future holds," he said, voice low and thoughtful. "But I do know this, as long as you are here I can face anything." Alara rested her head lightly against his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "And I will," she said, "I will face anything with you." For a long time they simply stood there, hand in hand, heart to heart, the bond between them stronger than any shadow, any curse, any fear. The night was still, the world hushed around them, and for the first time in years the Duke felt a quiet hope stirring within him. As the hours passed, the first hints of dawn began to color the sky. Soft pink and gold light seeped through the clouds, touching the palace towers and gardens with warmth. The darkness that had threatened them for so long had been pushed back, not destroyed, but held at bay by the courage, trust, and love that now bound them together. Alara looked up at the rising sun, feeling its warmth on her face, and then back at the Duke. "The night is over," she said softly, "and we are still here together." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that reached his eyes. "Yes," he said, "together, and perhaps the dawn is just the beginning." For the first time the Duke felt free, not completely, for shadows always lingered, but free enough to step into a life where he was not bound by fear. He had found someone who chose to stand beside him, who saw him for who he truly was, and who believed in him even when the darkness tried to consume everything. The palace, bathed in the soft light of morning, seemed to reflect the change within him. Walls that had once felt suffocating now felt like protection. Corridors that had once echoed with whispers of fear now held the promise of hope. The gardens below, still sparkling with dew, seemed to mirror the new beginning that awaited them. The Duke turned to Alara, his expression soft and filled with emotion. "You stayed," he said quietly, voice almost breaking with gratitude. "You stayed beside me, even when the night wanted to swallow us, and I will never forget that." Alara smiled, her own eyes glistening. "And I will never leave," she said. "Not now, not ever. We face everything together from shadows to dawn." He held her hand, pressing it gently against his heart. "Then we begin," he said, "not just surviving the night, but living together in the light." As the sun rose higher, spilling golden light across the palace, Alara and the Duke stepped back from the balcony. The air was warmer now, the world alive with possibility. Shadows remained as they always would, but they no longer held power over them. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger, bound by trust, courage, and a love born not from ease, but from facing trials side by side. And in that moment beneath the rising sun, they knew that whatever storms might come, whatever shadows might return, they would face them together. The night had ended, the curse had been tested, and a new day, bright, fragile, and full of hope, had begun.